In the photography world at the moment, there is a huge buzzword, and that's mirrorless cameras, and whether or not they are going to replace basically DSLRs that have been around for, I don't know, forever now. Well, I'm here to say that mirrorless cameras are fantastic, but what I want to do in this video is just explain a little bit more about the pros and cons for each system. So what the pros are for a DSLR, what the pros are for a mirrorless camera, and also go into some of their cons. Because neither system is perfect, both have advantages over the other one, so I want to help you basically choose which system might be best for your style of photography. Something you've got to remember is my needs won't be the same as what your needs are. I'm a wedding photographer, so I'm going to approach this video and the pros and cons from my perspective. If you're a landscape photographer, some of these things won't apply to you, or if you're a wildlife photographer, again, it won't necessarily apply to you. Some things will. So just bear that in mind when you're actually looking for a system, whether it's a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. What is the most important aspects for you personally? Because like I said, something that's important for me won't be for you. So what is the pros of a DSLR? Well, from personal experiences, you can drop them and they will just keep on going. Maybe not the lenses, but the actual camera bodies are incredibly tough. There's no getting around this. They are typically much tougher than a mirrorless camera. Yes, something like the Panasonic G9 looks pretty damn tough. The Olympus series cameras, especially the higher end ones, the EM1 Mark II, is a very tough camera. Is it going to be as tough, or are they going to be as tough as a DSLR? Probably not. So if you're shooting in really harsh conditions, maybe, I don't know, if you're out in the wilderness somewhere, wherever, it doesn't matter. If you're in harsh conditions, a DSLR might be beneficial for you, especially if you're in wet locations, a rainforest, let's say, just on the top of my head. Somewhere where the moisture can get into the camera system, a DSLR most likely is going to be your best option. For other scenarios, the weather sealing on a mirrorless camera is going to be most likely more than adequate. Sony's potentially haven't got the best reputation for this. I personally use Sony's myself and I've never had an issue, but then again, I don't shoot in tropical rainstorms, so I can't really say, but typically the toughness and weather sealing of a DSLR is going to be superior to that of a mirrorless camera, so definitely bear that one in mind. But like I said, mirrorless cameras, they're still pretty damn good. I know from experience or looking at a number of videos online, something like the Olympus EM1 Mark II, which I'm actually filming this on right now, is a very weather sealed camera. It's a very durable camera. You can, I think there's a guy called Blunty once puts the actual camera into a dish of water with the lens attached and still taking pictures with it. It works perfectly. It's a very, very good system. Same with the Panasonics, they look very, very good. As I said, the G9 looks very, very good. I've never personally used it, but it looks damn good. So again, but keep that in mind, weather sealing, probably better with a DSLR. Another huge factor when you're buying a camera system is the actual lenses and the lens lineup, you might say. So let's compare something like Canon DSLRs against Sony mirrorless cameras, because a lot of people are comparing these, saying that Sony just doesn't have the lens lineup, and this is pretty much true. It's a con of Sony's, but I will get into this in a minute, more on the Sony side. You see, Canon introduced their EF lens lineup back in 1987, which is what, let's say 30 years ago, just for argument's sake. I know it's 2018 now, but let's say 30 years. So they've had a long time to actually build up the amount of lenses they have and the variety of lenses, and obviously third-party lenses as well. So they've got a huge array of options. Sony, yes, they don't have the same lens lineup. You know, there is gaps missing in that kind of range, you might say, but it's not like they haven't got options there. There is some prime lenses missing, so they haven't got native Sony, let's say 40mm, 24mm for the full frame, etc, etc. But there is third-party options, and because you've got the MC11 adapter from Sigma, you can attach basically any lens you want from a DSLR onto the Sony mirrorless cameras. But again, if you want native lenses, the better options, it's going to be DSLR. or at least for now anyway. Obviously in the future the lenses will get more vast on the Sony side. If you look at something like the Fuji lens lineup, they've got a pretty robust mount, and if you're going over to the Micro Four Thirds, so Olympus and Panasonic, they have a ridiculous amount of lenses. So just because Sony doesn't have a full array of lenses yet, just remember they've had their FE mount for about 5 years now. I could be slightly wrong on that date. They are getting better. As I say, Fuji's got a huge array of lenses for pretty much everything, and so does the Micro Four Thirds system, so Olympus and Panasonic. So lens lineup is very, very important, but again, DSLRs are going to have the edge. The last main positive for a DSLR is battery life. It's typically going to be much better than a mirrorless camera. It's not saying that mirrorless cameras are bad. They've certainly improved in the last few years. Yes, you can buy third-party batteries for all camera systems, whether that's DSLR or mirrorless. But it's definitely, if you're going out and about and you don't have many batteries, think about it, because you don't want to be in a situation where you haven't got any battery power. So yeah, DSLRs will have better battery life. Now let's look at some of the positives for mirrorless cameras. I'm going to try and keep this more broad than actually just single out, let's say Sony or Olympus, etc, etc. There is a lot of positives to mirrorless cameras. So one of the big things is the EVF, or electronic viewfinder. Basically what you see is what you get. So if you're underexposed to the picture, you'll know straight away. If you overexpose it again, you know straight away. With a DSLR, you're looking through basically a pentaprism. It's just a bunch of mirrors, so what you see in front of you with your naked eye is how the camera, well, it's not how the camera sees it basically. The camera will see the picture very, very differently. So what you take a picture of might not be the finished result. You don't have that on a mirrorless camera. Does that even make sense? Basically, what you see is what you get through the EVF. It helps me personally being a wedding photographer, so I don't potentially underexpose a picture too much or overexpose it, especially if you're running and gunning, because with weddings, they happen very, very fast. So I need to change my settings extremely quickly, and potentially I can make mistakes, but with the EVF, I've got less chance of making mistakes. I never had too much of an issue with this personally with a DSLR, and I can still get great images with a DSLR, but it just makes my life that little bit easier. If you are someone like I say, a landscape photographer, you might not see the benefit of this. Being a wedding photographer, I use a lot of fast prime lenses, so a 35 1.4, an 85 1.4, and so on and so forth. So what happens if I have those lenses on a DSLR? Well, I've got to calibrate those lenses to that camera body. If I don't, the camera will say it's in focus when it might be out ever so slightly. And when you've got a very shallow depth of field, let's say instead of having that, I've got this, and if it's out ever so slightly, it can mean the focus being on the eyelash instead of the eye, and it's a big no-no for me. Now, because of mirrorless cameras, I never ever have to calibrate a lens to the camera body. There's no pentaprism there, so there's no mistake with the focusing, which is fantastic for me personally. How much mileage this is for you, I can't say, but generally speaking, I found the focusing to be so much more accurate on a mirrorless camera, and that's just my personal experiences. I used 5D Mark IVs all of last year, 5D Mark IIIs year before that, etc, etc. I'm very kind of used to the DSLR system, but I just found the accuracy on that focusing to be better on mirrorless cameras, and that's the mirrorless cameras that I've got, so the Sonys and an Olympus as well. It's just really, really nice to know that you've got the confidence to take a shot and it's going to be perfectly in focus. A huge thing for me as well is silent shooting. If you're, again, a landscape photographer, it's not really going to be any use to you. If you're a street photographer, it might be some benefits for you. But silent shooting for me is amazing, because when I shoot a wedding in, let's say, a church, the vicar, quite honestly, they don't want to see me walking around, and they certainly don't want to hear that camera clicking. So turning the camera onto silent shooting, it's so quiet, you can hold it against your ear and you can't hear anything. Yes, a DSLR like a 5D3 or 5D4 has something called silent shooting, but it's not silent. You still get a faint clunk. I'll show you. 5D Mark IV. Let's put it onto. This is meant to be the silent shooting. You hear that? That's the silent shooting. That's not silent in my book. A silent shooting on a mirrorless camera is precisely that. You can hear. You can hear this. Absolutely nothing. that's perfect. Something else that is super useful, and that's having the autofocus point basically spread all the way across. I'm looking at my little screen here, all the way across from top to bottom. It's just a little bit of a game changer for me, because typically on Canon side, I think it's a little bit better on Nikon side, so I'm not going to slag Nikon off too much, but they fall in a similar kind of ballpark. But they have their focus points more in the center, as I'm showing basically here and somewhere on the screen at the moment. But a mirrorless camera will typically have their focus points basically spread all over the entire screen, which is fantastic. This is really useful if I'm shooting let's say a 20mm at 1.4 Sigma art, for instance. I don't want to focus and recompose, because if I do that, the focusing will be out slightly. Now I don't have to worry about it. I just put that 20mm on my Sony and I get perfect focus. It's a real bonus. I don't really know why Canon and Nikon basically keep their focus points towards the center. You don't need to anymore. They can spread them out a lot further, and then make a lot of people are actually really happy. You've probably heard the face and eye autofocus on the Sony cameras. Fuji have it, Olympus have it, Panasonic have it, all to varying degrees of success. Sony's is the brand I went with because I'm a wedding photographer and they have their full frame options. Plus, the autofocus for the face and eye it's incredible. I don't think, until you've actually used the system for the face and eye autofocus, you can really appreciate just how good it is, how useful it is. It is very good. It doesn't mean that if you use a DSLR you can't achieve the same type of image. You absolutely can, but this is quality of life kind of improvements to the technology. You know, on your mobile phone, if you try and take a picture, just a casual picture for like some friends or something like that, it will focus straight on the face and you don't have to worry about where the focus point is. Very kind of similar idea on a Sony. You've got a little bit more creative control, certainly, but it's so useful. Again, if you're a wildlife photographer or landscape photographer, it's no benefit to you whatsoever. But if you're a people kind of shooter, like, I don't know, a wedding photographer like myself, or a studio shooter with models, having the face and eye autofocus is so incredibly useful. Again, each brand will do it with varying degrees of success. Sony is probably the leading one at this. Yes, something like the Canon M50 has a face autofocus. It might have eye autofocus. I've not used that particular camera, but Canon hasn't really done anything with mirrorless world. They've basically released that camera. I think there's 5 or 6 lenses on that system, and that is it. That system's been out 2-3 years or something like that. They've got basically no lenses whatsoever. And now the last kind of point I want to make about mirrorless cameras, and that's the in-body image stabilization, or IBIS. It does vary again between brands, so I would say the Micro Four Thirds system is far superior to anything else on the market for the in-body image stabilization. It's way better than the Sonys or even the Fujis. They're not bad, don't get me wrong, but the Micro Four Thirds system, so Panasonic and Olympus, absolutely smashes it out of the water. For instance, take a look at this little bit of footage I filmed the other day. Me and the wife was just up the field walking the dogs. I'm on my Olympus EM1 Mark II. I've got this little lens. Let's see if we can see it. So this is a 45 1.8, equivalent of a 90mm 3.6 on a full frame system. It's a lovely little lens. I mean, look, it's absolutely tiny. Size doesn't matter, but in this footage you can see that it's incredibly smooth. It doesn't jerk around all over the place for a 90mm equivalent. I'm not on a gimbal and I'm not on a tripod, and yet it's really smooth. There's no way on this planet I could get the similar kind of look on a DSLR. So in-body image stabilization, absolutely on a Micro Four Thirds mirrorless system. If you shoot video, that's where you've got to go. It's just one of those things. Something else that a lot of people really point out, and that's the colours on, say, a Sony or a Fuji or whatever. Actually, Fuji's are really damn good, so is Olympus. But the colours, a lot of people say they absolutely love the colours on Canons over everything else. And this is absolutely true. Canons do typically render skin tones that little bit better. But it's not to say that Sony's haven't improved, especially in the latest generation. So the A7R III, the A9 and the A7 III, they are much, much better. As I said, the Olympus and Fuji's are very, very good with the colours. Fuji's, I'd say, is more of a vintagey kind of style or feel to the pictures, but they're still incredibly good looking pictures. And Panasonic, I've not really had that much experience, but from what I've seen, they look pretty damn good. And if you can only tell by zooming into a picture by, let's say, 200% to see the differences in the skin tones, there's no real difference then, is there? I mean, seriously, please, no client of yours is going to zoom into those pictures at that kind of percentage and say, this skin tone just doesn't match up, it's like 0.5% out. They're never going to see it. Yes, Canon does still have slightly better colours, I can't deny it, but it's not like mirrorless cameras are bad. Again, have a look at more at the colour science I'm sure there's other videos online that can really go into a lot more detail than I am at this moment, because this is just glossing over it. But colours, just know there's not really any difference these days. There might be ever so slightly, fractionally out, but that's something you can very easily tweak in something like Lightroom. I mean, it takes like 2 seconds. So for all intents and purposes, there's no real difference. So that's enough of me rambling on. Are you going to stick with your DSLR, or are you going to move over to a mirrorless system at some point? Remember, there's a lot of options out there. One doesn't mean it's better than the other. It just means it's a different option. Remember, image quality wise, there's not much in it. It's just quality of life improvements. Does in-body image stabilization mean something to you? Are you going to be doing a lot more video? Does the facing eye autofocus really tempt you? I don't know, I can't say. Remember, if you're a landscape photographer, your needs are going to be different to what mine is as a wedding photographer. So just let me know down in the comments. Remember, if you like what you're watching on the channel, just, I don't know, subscribe, like, comment, etc, etc. Maybe click the bell thing, and I will catch you next time, I guess. Laters.